Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Mr. McAdams.
Mr. Paul, how are you, Dr. Paul?
Okay, very good. And I'm going to do this a little bit different today. I want to mention a couple things, but I want to talk about this contract with the F-35
and new stuff.
The Boondoggle, and a lot of money involved, and there's a lot of concentration on impeachment. And sometimes these guys needed impeaching, but they dwell on other things. And but before I do that, yesterday I mentioned it, but I want to recognize once again that the significance of today, Halloween, and there's so much that Washington invites on Halloween. You'd think they're all wearing costumes. At least their actions are like Halloween, and people should be frightened. but they're for real.
For real.
That's the whole thing. But this is back again to the college campuses. The cultural Marxists, and nobody can be offended. And, I sort of personally like to practice not offending people. I'm not so sure every politician in Washington accepted that. But I never got any fun out of it, and I didn't think I gained by it, and I didn't think it was wise to do. But so I don't like to be offended, and some other people don't like to be offended. But somebody complaining right now about being offended, I think it's over the top. I think that they offend me, and that's the point I want to make. But it says the majority of American students now want wearing offensive Halloween costumes to be punished. Well, what is offensive and who should be doing this and who's going to do the punishment, who's going to make the decision. But over half of the students agree with this nonsense. And I keep thinking, well, okay, if you applied the rules to those who are offending us, what they do to me is they offend me when they do some of these things in proposing that they know what is right and wrong. So someday, if this persists, it'll be turned back on them, and they will be the ones that will be on the receiving end, and that's generally what happens. Everybody is including, and they get the medicine they deserve, but I think we should just get out of this business. But this whole thing is very offensive, but generally they don't look at it. They decide they're the kingmakers, and they set the moral standards, and they're going to invoke the punishments. It's a system that has deteriorated, and I guess it's appropriate for Halloween to talk about that for a minute. But I don't know. If we will ever cancel our offensiveness. I don't like to be offended. I don't think we should offend people, but that happens to reflect a person's character and morality. It has nothing to do with rules and regulations and people who run colleges that don't care, about what happens. There's no management. I mean, why are these kids coming and they probably don't even pay for their education. They probably borrowed all the money, and they're going to set up the rules, and they don't want anybody possibly offended because we want a perfect world.
And how do you know what's offensive if you cross over the line, if you do something you could? It really, at the risk of sounding like an old folk, think about the college campuses in the day. Think about the 60s. My old college, UC Berkeley, they were protesting for free speech. They were protesting across the country to end the war in Vietnam. And now they're protesting to keep someone from wearing an Indian headdress or whatever is offensive these days, maybe a sombrero or something. So look at how far we've fallen into this self-obsession. Instead of stopping an immoral war, instead of stopping the surveillance that we talk about all the time. No, I don't want to be personally offended by your costume. It really is sick.
Well, just a few minutes ago, they had the vote on the rule on bringing about the process of investigating the impeachment. The rule was significant. It's the kind of thing that's usually partisan, and I would generally vote for rules unless it's an extreme thing like bringing up a bill to go to war or something. Yeah. But basically, I would vote for a rule saying that the party in charge has to bring this stuff to the floor, and it's up for debate. So this was just on the rule, but it's after all that mischief going on, of secret hearings going on. So I think this, in a way, is maybe all the damage is done, but in a way the Republicans win, that from now on I think they might get a little bit more coverage, but already the Republicans said the way the rules are written, they're not going to have a lot more advantage. But it's something that's going to be ongoing, and we'll probably talk about it later on. But I think the impeachment process is a pure distraction, and I wanted to work that into the subject we're going to talk about today, and that is the amount of money that we, the government, the people, are going to spend to buy 478 more F-35.
Yeah.
$34 billion. Army, Air Force, and Navy all want these things. And the plane doesn't have a very good record. But not only do we buy them for our own military, we're in the business of buying and selling. So it's a big business, and it's Lockheed Martin that got the contract. And this is once again corporate welfare. And if we wanted to think about impeachment, some of this stuff is, I guess, philosophically is impeachable because it's so horrible. But our whole foreign policy, I remember when I had to vote on Clinton's impeachment, I sort of cheated because in my mind, I was voting because of all the immoral things he was doing in foreign policy and bombing people for reasons. So I thought he deserved that. But here, this thing is going on, but it's bipartisan. Republican, Democrat. I bet there's no speeches on the House floor today about the ridiculousness of all this money being spent when we have no money, and it's not going to help our defense. I don't believe it for a minute. Matter of fact, I think it endangers us. I think people are going to retaliate to us, because we're over there bombing them, and there'll be blowback from all this activity, and there's always been that way.
Yeah, and this obsession, whether you're on Team R or Team D on the impeachment process, and he said, he heard something, he saw something, that's obsessed. Everyone is obsessed with this. But here's a big yawn when the Pentagon decides, as you say, $34 billion to purchase 478 F-35s. But, that's only the tip of the iceberg, because to get to where we're actually spending this much money on the plane, they spent about $500 billion, $406.5 billion, getting us to this point. Now we get to buy the stuff. But, Dr. Paul, I think you're being a little bit too harsh about this, because we were told in the media that this is a 12.7% discount from what they said. Oh. So we're getting a bargain, 12% off of the price, only $80 million per plane. So, take it easy.
Let me ask you, could that be somewhat similar to how the stores do it? They always have a sale. And, it's the beginning. They just have a brand new product, and the Christmas season is just starting, and you'll get a notice. 35% off if you get here within a week. So from when?
Yeah.
So I guess that's the kind of discount. No, the damage has already been done, but it's continued, because not only do they buy these planes for our military to use, but they're involved in the selling. It isn't like the private industry sells these to another country and they take all the risk. I've always said they shouldn't even have the right to do it. All the special aspects of these planes and weapons that we have should be, the taxpayers should own that, and we shouldn't be selling it to anybody. If you're non-intervention, have it there in case we need to defend it. But no, this is big business, and part of what's going on now is where we're selling these things. And I'm sure you saw that article about Poland.
Yeah,
it's going to get some F-35s, and that's going to be the 13th country. I bet you there's going to be some clapping on that, another sale, but you say, well, that's should be just the company sell it, shouldn't have anything to do with the government. But no, the government built it, and then when they sell the plane, the countries don't have money. They don't have billions of dollars to give us, and the money goes from the Export-Import Bank. They borrow it. That goes, directly back. It stays in this country and goes to Lockheed Martin.
Yeah.
And when they make these loans, the loans are guaranteed. So if Poland is not absolutely solvent and good, agents, and they are determined to pay, it'd be okay. But most of these countries are not going to pay the bills, and but the banks and the government will guarantee it. So it is a big mess, and it's a big contribution to the obligations in the future, as well as the many billions, now trillions of dollars we spend on these weapons that has nothing to do, with national defense.
And the Poland example is perfect because it just shows what a ripoff the whole thing is. The people of Poland should be furious with their government. But this is how it works, Dr. Paul. You think about the propaganda cycle. Okay, you've got Lockheed Martin spending all this money to make this plane. They're going to make a lot of money off of it. What do? They give a few millions to the Atlantic Council, the German Marshall Fund, all of these think tanks. These think tanks put out paper after paper about the Russia threat. Russia's a threat. You got to get this. Poland is already obsessed with Russia. So this propaganda feeds the popular view of Poland. The people are clamoring. We got this Russia threat. We got to do something about it. And Poland goes ahead and buys Lockheed Martin's planes. So Lockheed Martin spends a few million on the think tanks, and they get a few billion on the return on the investment.
Well, the other thing that they do, because there's no resistance in the Congress, it's because philosophically they support all this and this warmongering and the military-industrial complex. But essentially, the plane is built not in one state. It's not all built in California. Every state gets a contract. So even a state like Vermont can get their congressmen, to vote for it, and even defy, Sanders' own image by supporting weaponry that's built in Vermont. So that's the part that's despicable, but they say, well, what we have to do is we have to impeach the president for all this picayune stuff. And there was a Democratic congressman spouting off this morning. And he said, we have to do this. It's necessary. It's our responsibility. And his explanation was the president may have disobeyed and violated the Constitution. He didn't say he did anything, but he might have violated the Constitution. Then when you think of all this kind of stuff and all the things that they do as in a bipartisan manner, and now they're going to go through this impeachment just because they hate somebody, and somebody lost an election. So they're not very good losers. I think that's part of the problem, but just goes on and on. But the bipartisan stuff is probably the most impeachable stuff. I mean, the Federal Reserve is supported bipartisan because everybody wants deficits. Everybody likes welfare. And, it just goes on. And now, just think of what's going on in the last 2 or 3 years. Everything in the news is, even before Trump was sworn in, the hatred had always built. He provokes people. Yeah. But that's his style. So they've been doing that, and they're going to continue to do that. And I wish they'd pay more attention to what they claim. We're doing this, and we're overseas. We're going to protect your liberties, and we're going to protect our Constitution. So we need more of this kind of spending. And if you don't support Lockheed Martin, that means you're un-American.
Yeah.
So,
you hate freedom.
What a mess.
But it's not only built in every state, it's built in a bunch of foreign countries too. So that's how you create your customer base. Let's remember one thing about the cost. Everyone is jumping up and down in Washington. This is the greatest news. We got a discount. We put in our coupon, only $80 million per plane. But back in 2001, when they sold this program, they said, it'll only be $38 million a plane. And now we're thrilled that the price has more than doubled. That says a lot about it. But let's just review quickly the problems with the plane, because we talked about it before. We can't forget the fact that this is a deeply troubled airplane. They wanted to put everything in it to satisfy every branch of the military. Yeah, I think it probably even has a couple of toasters and a microwave and maybe a K-cup brewer in there. Everything in there. But here's a piece from the National Interest in March, citing information received by the Center for Defense Information from the Pentagon itself. The article, Why the F-35 is Not Ready for War. Just a couple of things, and there's a lot more. Anyone can dig into it and find more. Little or no improvement in key availability, reliability, and flying hour metrics. Few of these planes will be ready for combat when they're needed. During the Marine and Navy testing, the planes suffered so many cracks and needed so many repairs and modifications that they couldn't even complete their 8,000-hour projected life expectancy. So they're going to be going to the boneyard a lot earlier than they planned. Despite years of patches and upgrades, the critical computer systems continue to malfunction. Still vulnerable to hacking. The tests have to be dumbed down so that the F-35 can pass the test. It's like our educational system, but this is serious business. It's supposed to be a life and death. So this is a deeply troubled system, but politically very popular because it gives the goodies to everyone.
Yeah, the only time they run into a little bit of problem politically is when they have to deal with a country like Turkey. All of a sudden that gets a little confusing because Turkey has been an ally, but they don't agree with what they should do and what we should do about Syria. And so Turkey's right in the middle, and they're close to Russia, and they started to buy missiles from Russia. Well, that annoys us, and they used to help us build the F-35, so they can't do that anymore. But in the meantime, they'll fulfill their contract and keep sending our parts. And, it goes on. But that is about one of the most unusual relationships of, but the good part about what's coming out of that is a pretty good demonstration on why NATO needs to go, because it doesn't make any sense them being in NATO and and yet there's all these conflicts, and they're closer to a Russian ally than in NATO, but time will tell.
Well, the Turkey thing is fascinating because they were being pushed to buy the Patriot from Raytheon. You got to buy this, you got to buy this. They said, no, we don't want it. We want the S-400 from Russia. And so everyone flipped out. They said, you can't have the missile that shoots down the F-35 and the F-35. It doesn't work that way. So it's so much pressure. They said, we're not going to budge. We want the S-400. And so the U.S. said, well, you can't have any F-35s. And they said, okay. So now they're actually, there's a new article. They're made a lot of progress in discussions with the Russians to buy the Sukhoi 35s, And so they said, okay, we'll buy the Sukhois. It probably has less problems. So that really says it in a nutshell. But I'm going to close, I think, if we're ready. And I'm going to do something pretty unkind. I'm going to steal something you said for my closing because it was such a great point, and I was going to wait and see if you'd made it, and you didn't make it yet. So we talked about impeachment, and if I'm stealing it back from you and you're going to say it, please stop me. But you mentioned the real quid pro quo, and this is what it's all about. The real quid pro quo is not Trump saying, hey, we're going to hold back your aid, Ukraine, unless you take care of Biden. The real quid pro quo was Washington telling Poland and Turkey and all these other countries, hey, or Saudi Arabia, hey, if you buy our F-35s, if you buy our missiles, if you spend a few billions, we'll turn the other way when you cut off the heads of journalists. We'll turn the other way when you do other bad things. If you do this, if you keep the machine running, keep the military-industrial complex well-oiled, we're going to turn the other way and you'll be our friend no matter what you do. That's the quid pro quo, but as you would say, it's never going to be punished because they're all in on the scam.
That was a good point.
I stole it from you.
You
Sorry.
said it so much better. But the weapons is quid pro quo. They get the weapons and they're supposed to do what we tell them, and they become part of the empire. That's where the real quid pro quo is. But the empire is not as solid as it used to be. It's becoming much weaker. But all foreign aid is quid pro quo. This whole thing that he hinted to it, that is so out of proportion to what it is, because I do believe that everything is given. In a way, you have to say, well, if you're going to give it away, they realize it's not going to help the people that we say we're giving it to help the poor people and help the country get back on their feet again. It's always going to governments, and we even give money out, and we believe we're giving the quid pro quo. But we can't even figure out. Remember, John McCain got mixed up on the terrorist group, which one to support. They just do it. So no, this whole idea. There's not a difficult job in sorting this all out. It's very complex, but just don't deal with those programs. We don't have the authority. We don't have the permission of the people. We don't have the authority under the Constitution to be giving away the people's tax money. And then we wouldn't even have this deal, because now, if they're serious, they could argue for a long time about what quid pro quo means. But it looks like Trump has overextended his use of quid pro quo. Even if he did, we don't even know. But eventually, maybe they'll wake up. But maybe the voters this fall, next year, will try to sort it out. But it is the best now. But I claim that the mess comes from the fact that things don't work well with the country, with the foreign policy, with the domestic policy, because I believe our country is bankrupt. We spend more money than we take in, more money than we earn, and we have not only a financial bankruptcy, which engulfs this country, it engulfs the world, but also there's a moral bankruptcy, and we sort of alluded to the silliness of what's going on our campuses, and there is a moral bankruptcy. And if you think about some of the clowns that are in Congress right now, you could identify some moral bankruptcy there. So it's a combination. So it's not going to go away. So there will have to be some type of a revolutionary movement in the direction of deciding what we believe in and what our culture should be all about. But I just don't think it's complex. It's just a matter of believing in liberty and promoting freedom and personal responsibility. And it's this dependency, the entitlement system. Yeah, poor people get entitled. Everything will take care of. You owe it to me. But Lockheed Martin think they're entitled too, and that's where the big bucks go, and that's where the big welfare is. But it's going bankrupt, so if enough Americans care about it, there will have to be a rebuilding or a reassessment of what our responsibilities are, and reassessment of what the role of government ought to be. And if anybody's really confused about it, we might even consider, rereading the Constitution and say maybe that's a pretty good guide, and not assume that we assume that maybe somebody violated the Constitution at the same time. About 90% of every vote they take into Congress doesn't fit into the definition of gaining authority from the Constitution. So I see big problems. I don't think they're that difficult to deal with, and I think we just need a lot more people with enthusiasm to defend the principles of liberty if they have an interest in peace and prosperity. Thank you for tuning in today, and please come back soon.